Chapter 18, The Mundane King, the Diner Table. The Final Shift. Walk into any diner anywhere in the industrialized world and look at the table. Past the laminated menus, beyond the sticky bottle of ketchup, you will find a pair of shakers sitting in quiet companionship. One contains salt, the essential mineral that human biology demands for cellular survival and neurological function. The other contains ground black pepper, a shriveled tropical berry that human biology does not need at all. It sits there passively, a dark, dusty powder resting inside a cheap glass vessel with a dented metal cap. In more modern or upscale casual establishments, you might find it encased in a disposable plastic grinder. This modern delivery mechanism is designed to be used until empty and then carelessly thrown away into the trash. This unremarkable scene represents the ultimate psychological and economic shift of our modern era. A spice that once drove desperate men to map the oceans and wage brutal corporate warfare is now virtually free. It is a completely commoditized condiment offered without charge alongside paper napkins and packets of artificial sweetener. This is the paradoxical nature of capitalist triumph in the agricultural sector. Ultimate economic success for an agricultural product inevitably leads to deep cultural mundanity. To understand this transformation, we must examine the sociological process of commoditization, a luxury turned invisible. When an object is exceedingly rare, it is singular, imbued with a nearly magical cultural status and extreme financial value. As early sociologists of commodity culture have noted, objects carry biographies, and their social meaning shifts as their physical availability changes over time. Black pepper was once the undisputed king of these singular objects, a status symbol so potent it was used to pay ransoms and buy entire landed estates. Through centuries of relentless trade, aggressive cultivation, and optimized logistics, human beings systematically solved the problem of pepper scarcity. We solved this problem so thoroughly that we erased the awe and reverence the spice once inspired across the globe. The pepper grinder on the diner table is a monument to our total victory over distance and geography. Yet, its very ubiquity blinds us to its history, masking the immense human cost required to bring it to our plates. The violence and desperation of the ancient spice routes have been completely sanitized for the modern consumer. The brutal history of the spice has been ground down into a mild, aromatic dust that we barely notice. We no longer see the blood spilled on the Malabar Coast when we casually season our morning scrambled eggs. We no longer hear the deafening cannon fire of the Dutch East India Company when we twist the plastic cap of a disposable mill. The relentless process of commoditizing the world's most desired flavor was simultaneously an act of historical and cultural erasure. By making pepper available to everyone, everywhere, at all times, we stripped the king of his royal garments. As economic evolution is driven by profit-seeking in the investment of key resources, commoditization acts as a generalized Darwinian selection pressure. This pressure transformed a sacred, medicinal, and elite luxury into an invisible background detail of everyday human existence. The culinary fencing of the palate. To understand why pepper, of all the exotic spices, survived to sit next to salt on every table, we must look to 17th century France.
During the Middle Ages, the elite European palate was defined by an explosion of imported, heavily spiced, and chaotic flavors. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, mace, and grains of paradise were used indiscriminately to mask the natural taste of preserved meats. These spices were applied with a heavy hand primarily to project immense wealth and aristocratic social standing. The rich ate dishes that were sweet, savory, and intensely aromatic all at once, creating a culinary aesthetic that modern diners would find overwhelming. This chaotic flavor profile began to shift drastically within the incredibly influential court of King Louis XIV. The French monarch was notoriously sensitive to heavy seasonings, preferring his food to taste like its natural ingredients.
He always considered the heavy masking use of Eastern spices to be vulgar, viewing them as a relic of a less refined, less civilized era. In direct response to the powerful king's delicate palate, a sweeping culinary revolution was quietly organized in the royal kitchens. The man who formally codified this revolution was François-Pierre de la Varenne, a brilliant chef and author. His seminal cookbook, Le Cuisinier François, published in 1651, changed the trajectory of global gastronomy forever. La Varenne systematically swept away the heavy medieval spice blends that had dominated elite cooking for centuries. He replaced the exotic Asian imports with local French herbs like parsley, thyme, chervil, and tarragon, cementing a new philosophy of natural, localized flavor. However, La Varenne made one glaring, historically vital exception to his strict ban on Eastern spices. He spared black pepper from the culinary purge. He recognized that while other spices overwhelmed a dish, pepper possessed a unique, subtle warmth that merely enhanced the existing flavors of the meat or vegetable. Pepper was officially paired with salt, establishing a powerful dual foundation for modern Western gastronomy that remains unbroken today. Salt enhanced the fundamental flavor of the food, and pepper provided a warm, aromatic yet mild contrast to the palate. Because French culture dictated high society trends across the entirety of Europe, this specific pairing rapidly anchored itself in the global culinary consciousness.
The duet survived the passing centuries, outlasting the availability and popularity of countless other exotic medieval ingredients. Thus, pepper was saved from the culinary dustbin of history by royal decree and expert gastronomic codification.
It permanently transformed from an exotic luxury used for showing off wealth into an essential daily staple for balancing flavor. When competitive restaurateurs in 20th century America sought to elevate their dining experiences, they revived the European tradition of tableside pepper grinding. The presentation of the oversized pepper mill became a grand gesture of hospitality, cementing pepper's permanent place in modern dining culture.
The variety is deeply rooted in the plant's unique biology and chemistry. Piper nigrum is a woody flowering vine native to the lush monsoon-soaked forests of the Western Ghats in Kerala, India. For thousands of years, indigenous Dravidian farmers recognized the immense value of the small wrinkled berries that grew in heavy clusters on these climbing vines. And these farmers developed complex agroforestry systems, trailing the shade-loving vines up massive support trees like the jackfruit and the mango. When the unripe green berries are harvested and carefully dried under the hot tropical sun, they undergo a profound physical transformation.
The outer skin turns black, shrinks, and hardens, protecting the inner seed and creating an incredibly durable agricultural product. Unlike fresh fruits or delicate leafy herbs, a dried peppercorn can last for years without spoiling or losing its aromatic potency. This exceptional shelf life was the precise biological trait that made it the perfect commodity for long-distance transoceanic trade. The secret to this incredible durability and to the spice's enduring global appeal lies in a specific chemical compound known as piperine. Piperine is a complex organic alkaloid that gives black pepper its characteristic pungent bite and physiological warmth. Unlike the capsaicin found in New World chili peppers, which primarily causes a sharp burning sensation, piperine offers a complex, slow-building sharpness. This alkaloid stimulates the palate without overwhelming the taste buds, explaining why it survived the French culinary purge of harsh spices. Chemically, piperine is remarkably stable under harsh environmental conditions. Ground pepper loses its pungency slowly as its geometric isomer, chavacine, converts into piperine, but whole, intact peppercorns retain their chemical integrity almost indefinitely. Furthermore, piperine possesses potent antimicrobial, antibacterial, and preservative qualities, making it invaluable in an era long before the invention of artificial refrigeration. It was actively used to preserve meats, fight off dangerous foodborne pathogens, and extend the edible life of precious protein stores. Beyond its culinary uses, the piperine molecule drove significant demand in traditional Ayurvedic medicine. Ancient texts document its use in treating a vast array of ailments from asthma and fever to severe gastrointestinal distress. Because it was biologically robust and chemically stable, black pepper could survive the brutal, months-long journey in the damp, rotting hulls of wooden sailing ships. It simply did not matter if the perilous voyage from the Malabar Coast to the ports of Europe took a full year to complete. The precious piperine remained securely locked inside the hardened blackberry, waiting patiently to cross the globe. It waited to be released by the crushing force of a stone mortar and pestle, or the grinding steel gears of a modern table mill. The biology of the vine and the chemistry of the alkaloid perfectly positioned black pepper to become the ultimate global commodity. The physical characteristics of the plant itself dictated the economic history of the human beings who sought to consume it. The lasting legacy, the global blueprint. While the physical peppercorn was ultimately consumed and digested, the desperate centuries-long pursuit of the vine left permanent scars and structures on the world. To acquire this single seed in sufficient quantities, human beings were forced to invent entirely new systems of global navigation, international finance, and corporate law. We must recognize the spice trade not merely as an exchange of consumable goods, but as the foundational catalyst for our modern, interconnected reality. The global blueprint, the architecture of modern trade, was drafted specifically to move pepper and its sister spices from the east to the west. Before the obsessive pursuit of these tropical spices, the world was largely a collection of isolated economic zones. These zones were connected only by slow, highly dangerous and heavily taxed overland caravan routes. The desperate economic desire to bypass the middlemen of the Middle East and directly access the pepper gardens of India forced European powers to master the sea. This singular obsession directly birthed the most vital and enduring institutions of the modern global macroeconomy. When we summarize the lasting legacy of the pepper trade, we can isolate the specific, permanent structures it left behind. Maritime cartography, the creation of the first accurate, scientifically projection-based global maps, allowing for repeatable intercontinental oceanic navigation. The joint stock company, the invention of fractional corporate ownership to spread the immense financial risk of transoceanic voyages among public investors, the multinational corporation. The establishment of proto-conglomerates endowed with quasi-governmental powers designed to manage complex supply chains across multiple continents. International Maritime Law. The foundational legal frameworks establishing the freedom of the seas, drafted specifically to justify corporate warfare and the seizure of spice shipments. Each of these massive global innovations was born from strict economic necessity. They were forged in the violent crucible of the Indian Ocean pepper trade, designed solely to maximize profit and minimize risk. These structures permanently transformed the world from a fragmented map of local kingdoms into a highly integrated, fiercely competitive global marketplace. We will examine how each of these structures was mapped, cemented, and ultimately embedded into the deep fabric of our society. And the mapping of the oceans. The first great obstacle to controlling the pepper trade was sheer geographical ignorance on a planetary scale. In the late 15th century, European mariners possessed only rudimentary charts, many of which were deeply flawed or based on ancient mythology. Many respected cartographers believed the Indian Ocean was a landlocked sea entirely inaccessible by ship from the Atlantic Ocean. It was the desperate hunger for spices that pushed brave Portuguese explorers to test these terrifying boundaries. Vasco da Gama finally succeeded in rounding the treacherous Cape of Good Hope in 1497, opening the sea road to India. Da Gama's arrival on the Malabar Coast shattered the ancient, highly lucrative overland monopoly held by Arab and Venetian merchants. However, discovering the sea route was only half the battle. The route had to be accurately documented, standardized, and protected from rivals. This immense logistical necessity drove a rapid, revolutionary advancement in maritime cartography. Cartography quickly transitioned from a decorative art of myth and speculation into a rigorous, mathematical, and highly guarded science. The practical demands of navigating the open ocean to reach the spice ports led to the adoption of bold new mapping techniques. In the 16th century, the Flemish geographer Gerardus Mercator codified a technique to help mariners accurately chart their voyages across vast, featureless distances. His famous 1569 projection flattened the converging lines of longitude, allowing sailors to draw a straight line of constant bearing across a flat map. While the Mercator projection severely distorted the size of the polar land masses, it was an absolute triumph for the global supply chain, the invisible web of commerce. These highly accurate maps were treated as closely guarded state secrets, fought over with as much ferocity as the pepper itself. To possess an accurate map of the Indian Ocean spice routes was to possess the keys to unimaginable corporate wealth. As these maps proliferated through espionage and conquest, they permanently linked the ports of Amsterdam, Lisbon, and London with Goa, Malacca, and Batavia. The humble pepper vine had successfully forced humanity to trace and mathematically measure the exact dimensions of its own planet. The resulting maritime cartography laid the literal groundwork for all future global trade, colonization, and international exchange. The maps drawn to find black pepper are the direct ancestors of the GPS networks that guide modern container ships today. Mapping the oceans was the first critical step in cementing the architecture of modern transcontinental trade. The architecture of capital. Once the oceanic routes were accurately mapped, the next massive hurdle to overcome was entirely financial. Outfitting a fleet of heavy wooden ships for a multi-year voyage to India was an astonishingly expensive and incredibly dangerous proposition. Ships were routinely lost to typhoons, outbreaks of scurvy, and violent piracy, meaning a single wealthy merchant could easily be bankrupted by one sunken vessel. To solve this critical problem of capital exposure, the Dutch and the English pioneered a revolutionary financial concept. They invented the joint stock company, allowing multiple investors to share the financial burden and the potential rewards of the spice trade. In 1600, the English crown chartered the East India Company, EIC, granting it a monopoly on Eastern trade. 2 years later, the Dutch Republic responded by amalgamating several smaller pre-companies to form the United East India Company, VOC. These organizations were not mere trading firms. They were the first true iteration of the multinational blueprint. By pooling the capital of thousands of individual investors, these massive companies effectively spread the enormous risk of the spice trade across the entire population. The VOC's initial public offering in August 1602 was a profound watershed moment in the history of global capitalism. The company's charter allowed any citizen of the Dutch Republic, from wealthy Amsterdam merchants to lowly domestic servants, to purchase a share in the company's future pepper profits. To facilitate the constant buying and selling of these public shares, the world's first formal secondary market was organically born. This market rapidly formalized into the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, cementing the financial mechanics of modern capitalism. The physical exchange building, opening in 1611 over the watercourse of the Amstel River, became the beating heart of global corporate finance. From this epicenter, the VOC and EIC grew to an unprecedented size, wielding economic and military power that rivaled sovereign European nations. They were officially granted expansive quasi-governmental authority by their respective states. These massive corporations were legally empowered to independently negotiate treaties, mint their own proprietary coins, and raise massive private armies. They built heavily fortified trading factories along the Malabar Coast of India. They aggressively subjugated local populations and rulers to ensure a steady, monopolized flow of highly profitable pepper and cloves back to Europe. The modern digitized global stock market and the contemporary multinational conglomerate are direct, unbroken descendants of these ruthless, spice-hungry behemoths. Corporate warfare and the Zamarin. The immense, unprecedented wealth generated by the corporate spice trade inevitably led to widespread, industrialized violence across the Indian Ocean. The VOC and EIC did not merely seek to trade peacefully with local Indian and Arab merchants, they actively waged horrific, sustained wars of displacement, monopolization, and total territorial conquest. Economic historian Niels Stensgaard brilliantly noted that the Dutch, unlike the religiously motivated Portuguese, used violence rationally and systematically. They coldly applied military force as a calculated, necessary business expense to stabilize unpredictable Asian markets and secure absolute monopolies. This rational corporate violence was most evident on the Malabar Coast, the historic epicenter of the global black pepper trade. For centuries, the powerful Zamarin of Calicut had controlled the incredibly lucrative flow of pepper out of the Indian subcontinent. The Zamarin maintained a delicate, highly profitable balance of trade with Muslim mercantile networks and Chinese fleets. When the heavily armed Portuguese arrived, they aggressively attempted to bypass this established system through sheer naval bombardment and intimidation. The Zamarin fiercely resisted the Portuguese attempts to secure exclusive shipping lanes for Malabar pepper, sparking decades of bloody naval conflicts. When the Dutch VOC arrived a century later, they brilliantly exploited these existing tensions to further their own corporate monopolies. The Dutch formed calculated, temporary alliances with the Zamarin to violently oust the Portuguese from their heavily fortified coastal strongholds. However, once the Portuguese were effectively eliminated, the VOC quickly turned its massive guns and mercenary armies on the local Indian rulers. The VOC considered extreme violence a completely appropriate and necessary instrument by which to obtain exclusive trading privileges and suppress pepper prices. They forced exclusive contracts upon local societies, threatening total ruin if the pepper was sold to the English, the French, or local Muslim traders. This relentless corporate warfare cemented European hegemonic control over the spice supply chain for centuries. The violence was always a means to an end, a brutal operational strategy designed solely to maximize shareholder dividends back in Amsterdam and London. The blood of the Malabar Coast was essentially converted into the capital that built the Grand Canal houses of the Dutch Golden Age. The pepper vine had transformed mercantile trade into militarized imperialism. The pursuit of spice had proven that multinational corporations were fully capable of waging world wars purely for market dominance and the legal fencing of the infinite ocean. This massive escalation of corporate warfare and intercontinental piracy required a bold new philosophical and legal justification. Traditional European laws, based heavily on papal decrees and land-based feudal rights, were entirely insufficient for governing the vast, untamed oceans. In early 1603, an armed merchant ship of the Dutch VOC brutally attacked and captured the Portuguese carrack Santa Catarina in the Strait of Singapore. The massive Portuguese ship was loaded with an astonishing, almost incomprehensible fortune of Asian spices, silks, and porcelains. The stolen cargo represented more liquid wealth than the annual tax revenue of the entire English government at the time. The brazen, highly public seizure of this vessel sparked a massive international controversy regarding the legality of private corporate plunder on the high seas. The Portuguese demanded their ship back, claiming exclusive divine rights to navigate and trade in the Indian Ocean. To fiercely defend their highly profitable actions, the VOC hired a brilliant 21-year-old Dutch legal scholar named Hugo Grotius. Grotius authored a lengthy, meticulously researched defense that was eventually published in 1609 under the title Mare Liberum, or the Free Sea. He argued forcefully and eloquently that the world's oceans were international territory, belonging to no single nation or king. He posited that all nations possessed an inherent, natural right to unimpeded navigation and free transoceanic trade. This brilliant text became the foundational underlying document for the modern international law of the sea. It was, in essence, the legal fencing of the infinite ocean, designed to protect the economic interests of the multinational corporation. Grotius' elegant argument successfully dismantled the archaic Catholic-backed treaties that had previously divided the entire globe between Spain and Portugal. By successfully arguing that the vast seas could not be owned, he provided the ultimate legal cover necessary for the VOC to operate. It allowed them to violently dismantle Portuguese monopolies on the Malabar Coast under the guise of protecting free trade.
A foundational pillar of modern international relations and maritime law was thus constructed entirely to protect a stolen shipment of pepper. Every modern container ship that crosses the ocean today operates under the legal precedents established by a young lawyer defending a spice cartel. The need to legally justify corporate piracy permanently transformed our understanding of global sovereignty and international waters.
The pepper trade had literally rewritten the laws of the planet. The fall into invisibility. The very geopolitical structures built to extract pepper, the global supply chains, the joint stock companies, the mapped sea lane has eventually caused its profound economic downfall. For centuries, black pepper was absolutely synonymous with immense wealth, an exotic treasure strictly reserved for the European aristocracy and the ultra-rich. However, as the multinational corporations perfected their brutal industrialized efficiency, the volume of pepper flowing into Europe skyrocketed exponentially. By the late 19th century, the roaring era of industrialization dealt the final, fatal blow to pepper's ancient status as an exclusive luxury good. Massive, coal-fired steamships rapidly replaced slow wooden sailing vessels, drastically reducing the time and immense cost required to navigate the global oceans. Furthermore, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 permanently altered the logistics of the spice trade, bypassing the long route around Africa.
As transport revolutions slashed shipping rates to historic lows, commodity market integration occurred on a massive, unprecedented global scale. Pepper, which had once been carefully weighed by the single gram behind locked doors, was suddenly flooding Western ports by the thousands of tons. This massive, unstoppable influx of reliable supply caused the retail price of black pepper to crash permanently. The spice transitioned rapidly from an exclusive marker of aristocratic wealth to a cheap, highly accessible staple for the rapidly expanding middle class. It was during this period of 19th century economic democratization that the sociological process of commoditizing the spice was fully realized.
The mass market pepper mill, famously invented and patented by the French manufacturing company Peugeot in 1842, played a crucial role in this transition. This simple, durable mechanical device allowed common households to easily crack the tough pepper berries themselves, right at the dinner table. As prices continued to fall through the 20th century, pepper entirely lost its ancient cultural mystique and allure. It was no longer a powerful symbol of global conquest, nor was it a signifier of elite, untouchable status. It was simply a background note in everyday cooking, a mundane necessity expected to be present in every pantry. The violent world-shaping struggles between the Zamarin of Calicut, the Portuguese armadas, and the Dutch mercenaries faded entirely from the public memory. The undisputed king of spices was aggressively stripped of his royal garments and put to hard work in the kitchens of the common people. Through the brutal efficiency of the very capitalism it helped create, pepper eventually found its permanent, quiet home on the diner table. Conclusion: the hidden history. When we pull back the analytical lens, zooming out from the grand, sweeping arc of global economic history, we inevitably return to the mundane reality of the present moment. We return to the sticky diner table, the low hum of the fluorescent lights, and the cheap plastic pepper grinder sitting passively beside the salt. It is incredibly easy to look at this disposable, mass-produced object and see absolutely nothing of historical or cultural value. It is completely unremarkable, entirely invisible in its quiet, everyday utility. Yet trapped inside that small, transparent plastic cylinder is the entire, violent history of the modern world. Those dark, wrinkled berries contain the profound chemical resilience of piperine, the evolutionary marvel that allowed a fragile vine to survive a months-long journey across raging ocean. They hold the lingering ghost of King Louis XIV, whose delicate, highly influential palate forever bound this specific tropical berry to the essential salt of the earth. Look closely at the finely ground dust resting on your plate, and you can trace the faint, bloody outlines of Gerardus Mercator's revolutionary maps. These maps were drawn specifically to guide greedy, desperate men toward the humid forests of the Malabar Coast. You can hear the chaotic, frantic shouting of the first public shareholders on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, eagerly trading pieces of paper to finance a ruthless corporate empire. You can feel the heavy, rational violence of the Dutch East India Company subjugating entire nations for a favorable profit margin. Insomnie palate durant sober-different weakenische protection voor de slijf from Halensjoren prospect Nujistan capital Nuxtramalicalis. En nou of Tolkebite van bij do niet lukt Bart and have back al do Mr. Vilbert. He were Jewish these mality and paupers to Bengus mality, who subdesticated the rise of change. Who's by manager from my side, giving K-cap 30 rates. You can find a tune you like pencil me, right? It go them contaminated. You can read the elegant, self-serving legal arguments of Hugo Grotius, who drafted the laws of the free sea to justify corporate piracy and secure the spice routes. All of this historical weightless spatial exploration of a previously unmapped planet, the ruthless innovation of corporate warfare, the birth of modern financial capitalism, and the meticulous chemistry of biological preservation rests quietly inside a cheap plastic pepper grinder. We successfully conquered the king of spices, dragging him from the throne room to the mass market. In doing so, we birthed the multinational blueprint, mapping the oceans and cementing the very foundation of the interconnected world we live in today. The ultimate, profound tragedy of this global economic triumph is that we have entirely forgotten the massive human and cultural cost of the victory. We have left the single most important and influential commodity in human history to sit, utterly ignored and unappreciated, waiting patiently to be casually sprinkled over a plate of eggs.